Everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the workshop on spirituality, religion, and stigma. My name is Alton B. Pollard III, and it is my honor to serve as moderator for this session. We were delayed in starting on time as someone said to me, well, I should have known that this is the Black Church session since we're starting late. However, I do want you to know that we have been delayed slightly because we were waiting for our technology, not because of our faith. All right, so just wanted to say that. It is good to see all of you who are here on this World AIDS Day. We know how terribly important it is for us to be engaged on this day and every day throughout the year, for there are so many people in our communities who are suffering from, who are enduring the stigma that has long been associated with having HIV and AIDS, unjustly stigmatized. For too long, it has been the case that we have had the impression that it is okay to have a hands-off demeanor or a hands-off approach to certain persons in our community because they do not fit our definition of what it means to be truly human. We have done it throughout the ages for reasons of sex, gender, race, ethnicity, language, region, religion, age. We continue to find new ways to divide ourselves, one human being from another. And when it comes to HIV and AIDS, there's no question that for many of us, this has become, over the last 30 years, yet another litmus test for who is to be authentically included in the human community and who will be excluded. We have done it with tuberculosis. We have done it with cancer. We have done it with sickle cell. We have done it with so many health care issues in our own society. Across the globe, we want to welcome all of you who are listening and viewing with us, whether you are in Uganda or Brazil or South Africa or any other country that may be a part of today's proceedings here at Howard University. It is good to have you. And we know, wherever we are situated on the globe, that this issue is not foreign to us, and the way that we treat each other is not different. Again and again, we talk about attitudes, and HIV stigma is often associated with poor attitudes, but it is even more than the attitude, the actions that accompany our attitudes that prevent people from being treated, from being educated, from being made whole, and from being a part of the human community in every way. So it is my honor to be able to introduce this panel this afternoon of women and men who have been deeply engaged in the work of destigmatizing, of freeing persons when they come into contact with communities of faith, churches and mosques and other households of faith, coming to them and knowing that they will not be turned away, but that they will be accepted fully as children of the living God. And it is so terribly important that we affirm this, because we know that the terrible irony is that in the place where people without definition, without condition, without category should be most accepted in houses of worship are the places where we so often have disinvited people, have excluded people, and it is to the detriment of all of humanity that we so do. I was just reading yesterday in the news about a church right here in the United States in Kentucky. You may have seen this. Anyone seen this about the church that has voted to exclude from membership persons who are engaged in interracial marriage? In 2011. Can you imagine this? So you know how far we have to go then. And with HIV, the terrible scourge affecting our children, women, and men, it is an epidemic that can be overcome because it is preventable, it is educational, it is educated, something that we can educate ourselves about, and it is absolutely something that has no business keeping anyone out of the human family. The speakers for this afternoon are the Reverend Tony Lee. He is immediately to my right and to your left, the founder and senior pastor of the Community of Hope African Methodist Episcopal Church. Reverend Lee has received national media attention on BET's Cousin Jeff's Chronicles, CNN, and C-SPAN. He has also been featured in various print media, including the Washington Post, Washington Times, Upscale Magazine, and Gospel Today magazine. He was also a contributor in the book Being a Black Man at the Corner of Progress and Peril. Reverend Lee has been honored by the distinguished privilege to preach at the Sunday morning worship service here at Howard University's Andrew Rankin Memorial Chapel. He also spoke at the 2005 Millions More movement, the 10-year commemoration of the Million Man March. He is currently the host of the gospel radio show Sunday Morning Hope that can be heard Sundays from 8 to 10 on WPGC 95.5 FM and WPGC.com. If you've never heard or met Reverend Lee before, I encourage you to hear him now, to visit his congregation at the Community of Hope, because he is indeed an amazing, superlative, courageous, prophetic minister of the Word. I'm going to just go down the line and introduce everyone and then invite each of them to speak. Next to Reverend Lee is Carolyn Massey. Ms. Massey is the founding president of Masmer Associates, a social venture company providing consulting, employment, and volunteer service opportunities for HIV-positive persons. She is director of the Positive Impact HIV/AIDS Ministry at New Samaritan Baptist Church here in the District of Columbia, and is a friend of SamariCorps Incorporated Community Development Corporation, also in DC. She is board director of Older Women Embracing Life Incorporated. How do you pronounce that? Is that OWL?
It's called OWEL.
OWEL. Okay, Older Women Embracing Life. Although in your case it should be Younger Women Embracing Life.
He's a smooth thing.
A member of the Washington, D.C. Places of Worship Advisory Committee, various other civic groups, and a member of Sister Circle of Love, Sister Love Incorporated. That's a lot of love. An International Fellowship of Women Against HIV and AIDS. Author of numerous publications on HIV, the African American Church and Community Stigma, and HR Metrics in Faith Environments. Her first book, Evidence of Identity, is scheduled for release soon. All right. Then, immediately to the right of Ms. Massey is Ms. Olivia Stewart. Ms. Olivia Stewart, who I had the privilege to meet just today, is a lay leader and former chairperson of the Providence Baptist Church HIV/AIDS Ministry in Baltimore, Maryland. It is a wonderful congregation for those of you who may be in that vicinity. She has 15 years of experience promoting HIV/AIDS awareness, education, testing, treatment, and support. Established in 1992, the pioneering ministry provided the church congregation and surrounding urban communities with HIV/AIDS information through conferences, workshops, health fairs, testing initiatives, and treatment resources. Her strong and visible outreach efforts have gained huge community participation and wide recognition for the ministry's successes and paved the way, very important, for other churches and ministries to get up off their behinds and answer the call for HIV/AIDS education, providing spiritual and emotional support in their communities. We need houses of faith in every community, on every corner, to be engaged in this work. Her strong leadership has also led the way by creating an open dialogue for expanding the education of other serious health issues through appropriate ministries of the church. In 2005, Ms. Stewart received the 2005 Maryland State Governor's Community Service Volunteer Award for her successes. She is the proud graduate with a degree in psychology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And then immediately to Mrs. Stewart's right is the Reverend Dr. Christine Y. Wiley, who serves as co-pastor at the Covenant Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. She is a fellow of the American Association of Pastoral Counselors and has been able to use her mental health background in various creative ministry initiatives and pastoral care modalities. She developed a clergy candidate evaluation process at Covenant, which includes pastoral assessment and readiness for ministry, spiritual formation, appraisal, and psychological testing. Actively involved in the struggle for justice for all people in the Washington, D.C. community and beyond, regardless of race, class, gender, or sexual orientation. She serves as a member of both the Executive Committee and the Strategy Leadership Team of the Washington Interfaith Network, and is a recent co-chair of DC Clergy United for Marriage Equality. I'm going to invite each of our panelists in order to speak for 5 to 7 minutes on their own sense of vocation, their own work in this important area of HIV/AIDS and destigmatization. And after that time, there will be a question or two, and then we will open it to the floor. So I will be looking at the clock, as will you, to ensure that we not only have time for all of our panelists, but for all of you to participate in a full conversation with these activists in the church. And we are waiting for Imam Johari, who will also speak to us as he arrives about the witness that is taking place in the local Islamic community. Reverend Lee.
We do want to celebrate Dean Pollard and the wonderful work he's doing over at Howard University School of Divinity. And I'm grateful for your helping us and leading us along this journey today. I want to at least acknowledge something so that you all understand how I got to be on the mic first. I got to be on the mic first because I thought I was being a gentleman as we left our chairs there to come up here. And I was trying to be a gentleman and let the sisters choose what chairs they wanted to be in. And because they knew what they were doing, they all sat along this way and put me here first. So I didn't want y'all to think I ran to the mic first, amen? I just want to let y'all know that they set me up, amen, somebody. And I am so grateful for them. I am the Reverend Tony Lee, the pastor of the Community of Hope AME Church. We're located in Temple Hills, Maryland, inside the Iverson Mall, in the lower level of the Iverson Mall. I guess one of the reasons that I would be at the table at Community of Hope, we are a young church plant. We started in the Legend nightclub about 5.5 years ago. And in 5.5 years, one of the things we did when we started in the Legend and then moved into Iverson Mall about 9 months later was that we wanted to have a hard focus on really dealing with HIV and AIDS. We felt as a young church we couldn't do it all, but we decided to have a focus around HIV and AIDS, violence, and education, and felt if we could really kind of have a laser-like focus in those areas, we may be able to have some type of impact. In that time period, what we have been able to shape is we have quarterly testing during church service. So not after church service, not on a different day, but during Sunday morning worship, we have testing quarterly for quarterly HIV testing during church service. We also have training of our members. We also have a barber and beauty shop outreach in which we provide information in about 15 barber and beauty shops in our area, as well as a club tour in which we go to several of the clubs, and we have a partnership with the Go-Go Coalition, and so we go out with some of the area Go-Go bands to include the Backyard Band to be able to go to different clubs and be able to hand out harm reduction information, etc. Now, when we're talking about destigmatizing HIV and AIDS in the church, I want to share at least a couple of pieces and not run over my time because, of course, these women have so much more to add than me. But one of the first things I believe that we need to deal with is that the church can no longer look at HIV ministry as outreach ministry, but it has to be looked at as in-reach. It cannot be kind of dealing with them, but it has to be dealing with us. And in many ways, we have shaped our, and a lot of times HIV ministry is outreach ministry, is what we do for them, instead of looking at it for the ministry that we have to do for us. And so that's one of the reasons that we test during church service, because it's for us, and we see getting tested and knowing your status and as a part of worship, and dealing with your body as a part of worship, because we have to deal with us. One of the other pieces I think that's significant as we move in this conversation is we also have to deal with cultural competency, and not just cultural competency around gender, not just cultural competency around sexuality or sexual preferences, not just cultural competency around race, but also around generation. And I think that a piece that we've missed is dealing with cultural competency around generation, that you talk about HIV and AIDS in the church differently to baby boomers than you do to the hip-hop generation. If you're going to shape HIV and AIDS ministry for baby boomers deal very much, and I don't care if it's a rich church or poor church, they deal very much with this whole concept of middle class appropriateness. And so this whole concept of middle class appropriateness shapes how you have the conversation in a church context, because a lot of times they will feel it's inappropriate to talk about certain things during a worship experience. And so theologically, you have to shape an environment in which you show them it's appropriate to be able to have the conversation in order to be able to move the conversation further. For the hip-hop generations X, Y, Z, and down, that's the kind of generations of the keeping it real. And so for them, it's not about showing that it's appropriate, but what you say is, let's keep it real. This is what's happening, and so we have to deal with this. And so in order to keep it real, and that kind of piece, and so it's more a piece for them of authenticity and dealing with what are the regular, everyday kind of pieces they have to deal with. And so what we do at Community of Hope, and what we found to be extremely helpful, especially in doing testing during Sunday morning worship service, is that we, one, talk about, okay, as your pastor, I have to deal with the reality that everybody in here is not getting any. Amen, somebody. And we have to deal with the practical reality as pastor that some of you all got some last night, and somebody rolled over out of a bed that wasn't theirs this morning to make their way to church. And so we deal with that practical reality that everybody is not getting some. But we also have to deal with the reality that if people are going to get tested, a lot of times that's saying that you are doing something that in church we say you're not supposed to be doing if you're out of wedlock. Amen? And so there's the need then to deal with the fact that in the church we have to shape an atmosphere so that what we say is, if we're asking, if you haven't gotten any since before the Mayflower, we want you to go get tested as a sign of leadership, because leaders get tested here so that everybody can feel welcome to go get tested. And so to go get tested is just you showing a sign of leadership for someone who had themselves in a risky situation last night. And so it is that type of sharing and community that has allowed us to kind of shape an atmosphere. Also, it starts with leadership. And so I get tested right there in front of everyone. I get tested, and then we kind of allow everyone to then say, okay, if you want to be a leader, if you want to help us shape an atmosphere of leadership here, then if you would, we can stand and go get tested. And what we find is that folks go and they get tested while service is going on, and they come back and still are able to participate in the worship experience. And we've been able to shape an atmosphere of love, an atmosphere in which it is a part of what we do. And so I believe that's just, in my brief minutes, what I'd like to share during this moment. And I'll hand it over to my sister, Sister Baxter. God bless you.
I just want to say thank you for the invitation. It's indeed an honor to be here at Howard again, and we are looking at, again, the International Conference on Stigma. Thank you so much, Dr. Rana, for inviting me to participate. As always, anything that helps to spread the truth about this disease, I'm all for it. And if it has to do with learning it and spreading it in places of worship, that really excites me, because that's supposed to be a place where we can find the truth. So we shouldn't be afraid of this topic, whether we're talking in the university, the academic community, or in faith-based institutions. My name's Carolyn Massey. I've been living now for about 18 years as HIV-positive person. My brother, Anthony, passed away at age 35 from complications of having been diagnosed HIV and then consequently AIDS. Now, that said, like most people, when I learned that I was positive, there's a term they call stuck on stupid. That was me for about a year. I didn't know what to do. My brother had just passed away the same year in the spring. I was diagnosed in the fall. I didn't have a clue what to do. We were living in central New Jersey, and we're talking about in 1994. There wasn't much in the way of medications to choose from. You know, you want some AZT, you could get that, but it made you just as sick as you would have been without it, from what I have experienced. So I made a decision, mostly out of fear. When I decided to do anything at all, I decided to move to Philadelphia. And the reason that I moved to Philadelphia was because I heard people there were living. I don't know what they had, but they had something. And they were very vocal about the fact that they were living with this disease. So I picked up everything I had and I moved to Philadelphia. When I got there, I was blessed again to receive a very good physician, someone who had a sense of responsibility when it came to being a specialist with this disease. He knew every new trial, every study, every kind of way we could twist and turn to treat me. He would engage me beyond my comfort level many times, but he was an excellent physician. So, grace again. After a while, I realized that I needed to start telling someone else about this, because I'm living now. I'm not sick. I had had experiences with pneumonia, but I made it through that. I decided I needed to start telling some other people. So I plugged in there with their CAB. CABs are the advisory boards that all of the institutions and hospitals and clinics that receive federal funds to treat HIV, they're supposed to have a community advisory board. That's to get the input of the patients that they serve about whether or not how they do things is effective and how it's affecting them. So I started with that. And then something else, another opportunity came, and I joined the board of Greater Philadelphia Healthcare. So that was another grace. And how many people know that HIV is not the only thing people have to worry about? Right? So life is going on. My path has not been a straight one. I've had to deal with a lot of things in life, like a lot of people, not special. I've had to deal with rape. I've had to deal with incest. I've had to deal with domestic violence across generations. I've had to deal with women who could not negotiate because they were financially dependent upon their mates, you know, across generations now. I've had to deal with drug abuse. I've had to deal with some pretty ugly things, but grace again. It just amazes me, and I am not convinced that we as a people are going to let something like HIV trip us up. It is a medical condition. that has a lot of helpers running around. The determinants, they're called. Things that make it more likely that some folks will be positive than others will be. Where you have a lot of poverty, you have a lot of HIV. A lot of unemployment, you have a lot of HIV. Where you have gangs, you have a lot of HIV. Where you have women with low education levels, you have a lot of HIV. Intravenous drug use, a lot of HIV. And guess what? We're sitting in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., where there are over 1,400 places of worship, and what do we have? A lot of HIV. We have a lot of work to do. You know, there are some very remote places in this country where people can say, we don't know, we didn't get the information, nobody told us. Sister or brother is calling it cancer. We know what it is. Let's not fool ourselves. The longer that we don't address this thing straight on, the more repercussions there will be for people who are already marginalized. So we can slip into that abyss, or we can get busy. And I'm going to pass the mic to the next speaker.
I am Olivia Stewart, a lay leader from Providence Baptist Church, Baltimore, Maryland. I am the former chairperson for the Providence HIV/AIDS Ministry. I have more than 15 years of experience working with the Providence HIV/AIDS Ministry during its 20 years of service to the congregation and to the community. I am honored to be part of this distinguished panel raising awareness to the HIV stigma. In the early 90s, under the leadership of our pastor, Reverend Marcus G. Wood, Providence Baptist Church was one of the pioneers in establishing an HIV ministry in the church. Now, Pastor Wood was sensitive to the problems of the AIDS epidemic, and he felt that our church could help meet the needs of the congregation as well as the community. Our mission in the ministry is to educate and raise HIV awareness, HIV testing, and HIV prevention. Provide emotional and spiritual support, and share information about the available resources. Our ministry has been active and successful in making a change in the perception of HIV through its outreach efforts by providing education through conferences, workshops, and health fairs. Additionally, our outreach to the community-based businesses and health-related resources have aided our efforts in a tremendous way by providing incentives, and these incentives were given to the participants by funding, materials, and other services to help us meet our mission. Galatians 6:2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Our ministry consists of members who are caring and compassionate to those who are infected and affected by HIV. Currently, under the leadership of our present pastor, Reverend Dr. Douglas E. Summers, the ministry is still highly visible and productive in carrying out the mission to the congregation and through the community by its HIV testing initiative. We have done some very innovative activities in the community and within the church. And as Sister Massey has stated, and Reverend Lee, about the generation gap, we make sure that our ministry touches the generation of youth who are ignorant and who are in denial, who have no fear about this disease. It is our belief that the sooner we educate the young youth, the earlier they will be able to understand the perils of this disease. I would like to share with you Howard University's interaction with one of our major activities back in the year 2004. We had an opportunity to do what we call an outreach to all ages from 8 to 80. This workshop we called a conference, and although we had workshops within the conference, but the conference was called Human Sexuality and Lifestyle from a Faith Perspective. I believe Dr. Winston Frederick from Howard Medical School was one of the presenters, and Dr. John McNeil was the one who actually presented. He painted a very vivid picture about how HIV is contracted, the transmission of HIV in all cultures. It was a magnificent conference with workshops that dealt with the lessons after the presentation. We had over 300 participants at that conference, and we were very proud of the fact that we were able to reach so many participants during that time. And as I said, that was in year 2004. Here again, we do many activities reaching out to the youth, because we know if we start early enough with the education, hopefully they will be able to share this information with their peers, and we can do a better job in educating our youth. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm Christine Wiley, one of the pastors of the Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ in far southwest Washington, which is Ward 8. And as we know, Washington, D.C. has one of the highest incidences of AIDS in the country, and the ward in which I sit, we go back and forth between Ward 7 and Ward 8 as to which ward has the highest incidence. So there's no way in the world that we, as a faith community, could not have the issue of HIV and AIDS as our ministry. But the question is, that was given to us was how can religion and spirituality encourage prevention, testing, and treatment? And so when we think about that, sometimes we get stuck, because years ago, I often would say that as a Christian minister, the church was one of the biggest perpetrators of stigma that I knew. Now, I do believe things are changing. I do see some things changing, but we have to recognize it is what it is. And so regardless of our faith, whether progressive or conservative, the issue of HIV and AIDS is still a big issue in our world for people of color, our people. And so we have to address it. There's no way not to address it. So we've got to meet people where they are. Because what we know is, for many people, the faith community is not a safe space. So looking at your faith community or the faith communities around, how is it that you can meet people who may be living with HIV and AIDS? How is it even someone who has HIV or AIDS, how can you feel safe in that place? I just want to share just a little bit about our journey and what you were talking about, Tony, in terms of keeping it real. I think that's the big thing, keeping it real. We have one part of our ministry is that we have teens who are peer educators, and they go out to other churches to talk about HIV and AIDS. But they came to me and they said, well, we don't know what to say because, well, they said that we can't, well, before we go, we can't say sex, we can't say penis, and we can't say vagina. I said, well, talk about risky behavior then. Talk about risky behavior, because that's what we've got to do. We've got to really meet people where they are. The whole issue of testing is a big issue. I don't know why we're not testing people when they get married. You know, we tested people a long time for syphilis. You know, we never tested for HIV and AIDS, and now we don't have to test for anything. But some years ago, I went to Senegal, and everywhere I went, there were billboards, you know, showing couples together, and they had condoms, and it was just, you know, it was just everywhere advertising. I wish we could find ourselves having testing in grocery stores and testing in the libraries. And so just as some of the other churches, we do testing every week at our church. And yes, we do distribute condoms. We don't put them in the offering plate, but we have them, you know, in our community outreach section, and so that people can use them, and they're the kind that people want to use. Because as we know, they put condoms in the schools in the District of Columbia, but so many young people would not use them because they were generic. They didn't want to use them. So we really do have to meet people where they are. And we've got to find ways to talk about sex. You've got to find ways to talk about sex in the church. And so however that is and however you can do it, we've got to do that because it is a pandemic. One of the things that we did also was to make sure that we connected with, because we've been doing this work just as you have since the late 80s, early 90s. So we connected with grassroots organizations that are already out there working with persons. And that opened a door for us to do spirituality groups within the community. That opened a door for us because persons, when we did spirituality groups or Bible studies with groups of persons that were living with AIDS, they said, we just want to meet regular church people. We just want to talk to regular church people. So I think that's important for us to be able to put ourselves out there in a way that we can be trusted. And the other thing, of course, is the education. Preaching, teaching, making sure that there's an open door to have whatever needs to be said, and then finding ways to talk about this risky behavior that people have that opens a door to become infected, so that whatever event we have, there will be testing. You know, whether it's a poetry slam, you know, or whether it's a Christmas event, you know that there's going to be testing that is going on. And the same way as many of the others have said, the pastors lead the way. We ask pastors, the deacons, the Sunday school teachers, when we have the testing, for everyone to get in line so that there is no stigma to get tested, because everybody is doing it.
We do have an additional member of our panel, and I mentioned previously that Imam Johari Abdul Malik was on his way, and he has arrived. He is Director of Outreach for the Dar al-Hujra Islamic Center in Northern Virginia, the former chair of the Coordinating Council of Muslim Organizations, the former head of the National Association of Muslim Chaplains in Higher Ed, president of the Muslim Society of Washington Incorporated, a founding member of the Muslim Advocacy Commission of Washington, D.C., and serves as the government relations of the
Muslim Alliance in Northern. Thank you very much. And my brother.
And he's a beautiful brother.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. First, I want to, because we're religious people, to give glory to the Almighty for bringing us together. And although we may have a light heart to make this subject a little easier to talk about, the reality is that as my sister was talking about her experience coming out and saying, I have this disease, that the reality is that the medication can, a healthy lifestyle can provide people who have this disease with an effective life. What they're dying from is not the disease. Many people are dying from stigma. Today I want to dedicate this short talk to two brothers that I know who are Muslim, who, because as a clergy I came out and said, we can talk about this, they came out and said, Imam, can you help me? One brother called me and he said, and his name, I have permission to use his name, Raini Muhammad, called me one day and he said, Imam, I just got the news that I transitioned from being HIV positive to having AIDS. And I don't know what to do. I said, well, brother, I don't know what to do, but let me call a brother that I know who's living with HIV, who transitioned, he has AIDS, and he's living. He said, no problem. I put them on a three-way because the issue of stigma, maybe he doesn't want people, he don't want to meet anybody publicly, but on a three-way, everything's cool. So we got on a three-way and the brother said, well, you know, brother, this is not the same disease today that it was yesterday. He said, I have been living with this disease for over 7 years. So it's not a death sentence. They start talking on the phone and the other brother, he start feeling a little better. I'm not gonna die because I transitioned. He said, brother, will I ever be able to go back? He said, no. Once you transition, you'll never go back. But it's not a death sentence. That brother was a brother Terry Muhammad Tahir. And he's been a tremendous advocate in this community. And so it caused me as a clergy to say, what do we do? I'll make a website and a blog spot, Muslim Americans living with AIDS and HIV. So then there's a place people can go, they can have a discussion without being afraid that somebody's gonna out them. Now, some of the brothers I know told me, they said, Imam, we have a problem. We don't go to Whitman Walker Clinic. Why? Because they don't want to say, well, it's a gay disease, so if I go to Whitman Walker, then that means I'm gay. And so I said, well, brother, why don't we go? We got some Muslims who deal with support groups for alcohol and drug addiction, and we can talk about it there, because I know some of the brothers said, I got it from intravenous drug use. They open about that. Called them, you know what they said? Brother, don't bring that disease into our meeting. Why? Stigma. It's all right to be a ex-IV drug user. It's not okay to say I'm HIV positive. So I can be treated for that, but I can't be treated and talk about how to live with AIDS or HIV. I want to read to you from the Quran, from a surah called Surah An-Nur, the chapter of light. where Allah God Almighty says, it is not the fault of the blind, nor the one who is born lame, nor the one afflicted with a disease, nor in yourselves that you should eat in your houses or the houses of your relatives. Meaning that just because somebody has a disease, you shouldn't cut them off, that they're still part of our family. Now let me tell you, I was with Ahmadinejad. You know who I'm talking about? We don't have gay people in Iran. Listen, man, you're out of your mind. Because denying that denies the fact that there are people who probably have AIDS and HIV. Saudi Arabia and many of the Muslim countries don't even keep statistics. They're in so much denial about the stigma. The reality is that it's happening. You know, in the book of Mark, chapter 1, verse 40, talks about Jesus and his relationship with the leper. Because for some reason, as religious people, sometimes we put together a disease with a judgment. If people have a certain disease, God is punishing them. I want to be very clear, in the Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he told Aisha radiallahu anha that these people were destroyed by an earthquake because of their sins. Are you with me? Sound familiar? So somebody said, well, then every time there's an earthquake, that means that they're being punished for their sins. So really? So that's why they had in Haiti, right? The Prophet Muhammad said, look, any time that I mention that God did this because of that, that is a condition of their punishment. And any time I don't mention it, it's a natural disaster. Somebody said, well, if it happened in New Orleans, then why didn't it happen in Las Vegas? We have to get out of the theological bind to try to say that we know why God does whatever God does. But a profound belief in Allah's qadr, that God knows what God is doing and Allah knows why he's doing it. And the reality is that we don't know, but we know what we're called upon to do. That as religious people, we can't let our doctrine get in the way of deliverance. Guns never killed anybody. People kill other people using guns. And one of the things that I love about Islam is trying to put things in the right context so we can talk about sex. I'm an imam, I talk about sex. I mentioned in my sermon, reefer. Right, everybody's straight then. But you know what happens? If the faith leader will come out and say reefer, will say condom, will say sex, will say rape, say domestic violence, then somebody gonna come to you afterward and say, Pastor, can I talk to you later? Because I need to talk to you, because I can't talk to nobody. But I can talk to you. And in doing that, that allows us to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. I require in my own ministry, everybody get tested before they get married. Omar, sexually transmitted diseases. I'm not marrying you. Oh, hey man, we want to get married Saturday. You need to talk to somebody else. Well, the other guy, we talked to him, but he can't do it Saturday. I said, well, then you're on your own. Because I'm not going to pray over you when you get sick. if I didn't take the responsibility to make sure that you stay healthy. Right? That makes sense. And so I'm saying to you, one of our concepts has to be, there's an Islamic concept called maslaha, the public good. Some imam, they don't want to talk about condom because they say if you talk about condom, that means that you're saying it's okay. What time? Oh, we got a great timekeeper in Reverend Pollard. He said go, and then he said stop. So, because I have to go, it is a reminder about creating a balance in our priorities. What is in the public good? If I talk about condom, are some young people going to go ahead and fornicate, or man is going to commit adultery? Well, if he was going to do that, trust me, he was going to do it anyway. He's just using your condom as an excuse. And so I'm saying to us now, we need to have an open dialogue with one another, keep it real, tell the truth, or else we're going to die from denial. Thank you very much.
We've heard from all of our panelists, and we have about 20 minutes. I have a couple questions I'd like to ask, but instead I want to turn to you. If you have a question, please come to the microphone, and you can direct it to the panelists, and I will ask the panelists to respond as concisely as possible so we can get several questions in if possible. But we've heard it very loud and clear. Our communities of faith, no matter what our religious faith may be, we can choose to dialogue about this, or we can choose to die.
That's right.
The choice is pretty simple, and I think we know which one will allow us to live. Please.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. My name is Beverly Elliott Butcher, and I'm a registered nurse by profession. And I also have a home base called Encore in Ministries, which I use it as an oral life history and things. And I'd like to use it as a tool to help communicate some of the things we were just saying. Because as the gentleman just spoke, Abdul Malik,
Yes, ma'am.
Pastor Malik, the three-way conversation you stated made it easier, and so I feel like we can use that as a tool. Now, what I actually got up here to say was, in my profession, I've known, and even before I became professional, we learned about non-judgmental, non-prejudice and all, and what I'm trying to say, coming from the initial get-together we had a while ago, I noticed one of the panel members stated that the injury from one of the local pastors about homosexuals and call them sisters and everything. My statement is, and my question is, I feel like, my statement first is, I feel like we need healing from both sides. Let healing continue. Because if we're going to throw stones from that side and from this side, when we all have come up in, not all of us, a lot of us have come up in church, and we know the injury, we all are aware of the injury that did come from church. But not everyone is like that. But if injury is going to come from, and we know what the words say, but in my profession, we have to be non-judgmental, because I have to take care of people who have had abortions, who have AIDS, who have different things. So I can't be judgmental like that. So my question is, what is your take for the healing that comes from even the people who have been injured without lashing back at people who do believe, who are non-judgmental, but are Christians?
Since we have several people standing, I'm going to just ask one of you to respond, and then we'll go to the other questions.
Being judgmental as you provide your
I believe I would address this like this. At some point, well, not at some point, I believe the church has to repent, well, faith institutions have to repent. That there has to be a period of repentance, and even in engaging communities, that we have to deal with our history. And so if you look at when HIV and AIDS first came out, the church was very unloving, very un-Christ-like, etc. And there needs to be some sense of repentance for that. Not just an I'm sorry, but a heartfelt repentance to be able to engage even in a healing process. And so I think that's significant. The second thing I think is significant is a church, and I think Dr. Wiley spoke extremely well about it, about churches being open spaces, and spaces in which everyone can feel that they're welcome. And so the church also has to be very intentional about shaping a space that's a safe space for everyone to be able to come, because everyone's God's creature.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Fuller, and I am a health professional and a woman of faith as well. Being on the other side and seeing and dealing with this disease and looking at life traumas that precipitate this disease, like incest, rape, drug abuse, all of those things. What is the church, or what are your organizations doing to address people with those life traumas, and how that relates to HIV and AIDS? Like, where's that connection? That's what I'm missing and haven't heard.
I'd like to just speak to that. I think one of the things, two things come to mind. One is that immediately it's very difficult for people to get out of their mind, how did someone get this disease? Mm-hmm. We need to get that out of our minds. You need to move away from that, because you're trying to figure that out so that you can determine how much you're going to judge. So we need to move totally away from that. One of the things that we've done in our church, for some reason, God has placed a number of clinicians. My doctorate is in pastoral psychotherapy, so we have had support groups, healing past hurts support groups, adult children of alcoholics support groups, survivors of rape and molestation support groups. So there are churches and faith institutions out there that are doing this kind of work. So I think that's the piece what I talked about earlier in terms of meeting people right where they are.
Thank you.
And hello, I am a health professional as well, working exclusively on the faith-based initiative at the Fairfax County Health Department. And my question is about the components of an HIV ministry. What are the necessary components? And the health director at the Fairfax County Health Department, she likes to use baking as an analogy, and so I kind of taken on that trait. So I want to bake sweet potato pie, and Grandma said I need butter, and I need an egg, and I need all these certain ingredients to make sure it's good. I don't want to just make a sweet potato pie that's not going to taste good, but I want one to be good. And so in that sense, what are the necessary ingredients of an HIV ministry that will make it effective, not only in the church, but as well as in the community?
Great
Yes,
question.
I would like to speak to that. One of the major components of starting a ministry is, particularly in the church, is for it to start with the leadership. The pastor will have to be supportive. And then we have to have people who are caring and compassionate to want to be part of this ministry. And once you gather the people of like minds together, the most important aspect of reaching others who have HIV and AIDS is to be educated on the disease itself. That is to understand the disease, how it is transmitted, the transmissions in all cultures, being able to speak the language, being able to share information, and just being able to empathize with the person. You have to have the knowledge of how this disease manifests itself within. If you have those components, you have the beginning of starting an HIV/AIDS ministry. But as having a ministry in the church is a very difficult process, because the church congregation sometimes is not the audience who you're really speaking to, but yet you have to speak within before you reach out. And that is our experience with our ministry. We went out to the streets and we tried to bring the participants into the church for workshops and to gain the information and the education we learned. And then we went back out to the streets because it is hard work, really. And if anyone who has worked in a ministry, you know how difficult it is to get people to really want to step up and even admit to you that they have a problem, or that a relative or a friend who might have the virus. So it is hard work, but having the caring and compassionate heart will go a long way, because it will support you through the learning process of reaching out to those who need your help.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Yes, sir.
I'm also a health professional, first year internal medicine resident. And my question is, based on what's already been said here and in the previous track, often with the stigma of HIV/AIDS, there's often stigmas also associated with what people think, or some of the causes associated with that as well. And I think one of the things that helps drive the stigma is the lack of willingness of people to actually talk about these difficult issues. And what I wanted to know was ways that places of worship can try and help make people feel more willing to speak to issues that are often difficult to talk about.
If you don't mind, I'll answer your question. No problem. Based on my experience. When we started the Positive Impact Ministry at New Samaritan, we realized that there were already some things being done. We're not having to start from scratch. There's an organization called the Balm in Gilead, which is an international organization. So we joined the Balm in Gilead. We went online and we named our church as one of their partners. We know that the local health departments provide support and referrals, so we introduced ourselves to the staff at the local health department. We identified AIDS service organizations, both locally, regionally, and nationally, and we connected with them. As an AIDS advocate myself, and member of the National Association of People with AIDS and several other coalition groups that advocate and are activists for services, and on behalf of people who are at risk and infected, we connected again. So wherever there was a meeting, wherever there was an opportunity to speak, wherever there was a class, if there was training that was being provided by the state of Maryland or the District of Columbia or through the Howard AIDS Education Training Center or John Hopkins AIDS Education Training Center, wherever they said you got a class, if I had to change, I was there. And so we encouraged our other members to do that as well. Where there was certification for certified counseling, testing, and referral, to become certified to do that, we encouraged our members to go do that as well. We wrote memorandums of agreement with AIDS service organizations that they would bring their van, park it outside our church door, and that they would test right there on site. We invited folks in to sit in the church basement and talk about HIV and AIDS. And we then looked at our internal structure and the way that we did our managing from the inside of the church, and found opportunities in practically every ministry to give those messages. Whether we were talking about the youth ministry or our Chosen Vessels women's ministry, the Real Men's ministry, even the SALT ministry that looks at social action, any opportunity we had to kind of give a message or get a message, we tried to plug in.
Well said. Thank you.
This is Dr. Rana. I'll be very brief. I think this was very wonderful. But one thing I keep missing, I think we need to all take ownership. I think physicians were among the first one to spread HIV. And part of the problem is we are trained to find causes. And clergy and faith-based institutions are again trained to find causes. you are feeling this way, you didn't pray enough, go back and pray. And we say, you're too fat, go on exercise that. So we are tuned that way, and that is inherently so wrong. Because we, in faith-based institution, health profession and health department have this wrong operating system where we see somebody being punished and says, he did this, he did that, he did that. And we have infected the whole community with this, that nobody can get sick. Lightning falls. Things happen. People get ill. People have genetic illness, which they didn't do anything to deserve. And I can vouch for it that I've been in contact with more than 600 individuals with HIV, and most of them were not doing anything different than what the person next to them was doing. And they were infected with HIV, while there are others who didn't do anything to deserve not to be infected. So I think that operating system is crucial. Second thing is to recognize that any time we move to judging another person, our brain has become infected with that virus or worm or whatever you want to call it. It's like it's occupying our brain, and it is replacing our basic resident programs of compassion, mercy, feeling for others. And I think having workshops, toolkits in faith-based organizations, but we physicians, health departments, we need equal amount of training. And that it could be, like Carolyn said, cultural competence, some of the other cultural competence, but toolkit. Remember, we are not dealing with a new thing. We're dealing with very stigmatized people.
Yes.
There were people, my patients who were here last year. This year, they didn't even want to come. Sit around, we don't want to be seen with you. They will think we have HIV. So it's a very sad truth. So there are people, I say, please go to this website. Say, no, I don't want to be found out to be going to a stigma website. So I leave, let other people have that. But I think take home, we all need to work together to develop cultural competence, deal with a very, very stigmatized population. And sometimes, we may never get them to disclosure, but we are here to give you shoulder until you are ready.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Doctor. Good afternoon, Joseph Reed, Senior Poli-Sci Major, AFM Studies Minor, right here at Howard University. My question is, how do we get faith communities to really directly and head-on deal with homophobia as far as their HIV and AIDS outreach ministry? Because we've kind of been skirting around the issue, we've kind of been circling around the bush, but I feel that no one has really come out to really specifically address the issue of homophobia, because you can have an HIV AIDS ministry, but if you're in your pulpit on Sunday morning calling gay men faggots and sissies, it kind of cancels that out.
Dr. Wiley, are you going to address that? You want to address that?
They said, Dr. Wiley, you want to address that?
I mean, I will, but I saw you reaching.
I do want to say something about that. I think it starts with the clergy, because often the way that the leader goes is the way that the congregation will follow, and oftentimes clergy don't want to address it because the other piece is that they don't want to have any controversy, any difficulty. Some of the things that have been helpful and have helped people to transform in their thinking have been safe space conversations for clergy. I've been involved in those before, where we meet with clergy who are the movable middle, where they're not really, they're really kind of pretty conservative, but they're willing to talk about the issue. So we come together to talk about it. We come together to have conversation. Nobody knows who's going to arrive. We only have 10 or so people there. These kinds of things are going on not just locally, but there are also some national groups that are talking about the African American community, and particularly how can we move the African American community to do that. But I really do think that much of it has to do with being willing also to be stigmatized yourself. And let me just say, the other day I went into a meeting. It was actually a social workers meeting, and when I said my name, they said, "Are you that Christine Wiley?" I said, "I probably am that Christine Wiley," you know. So that's the piece also, is that when we're looking for compassion and when we're looking for justice, you have to be willing to be stigmatized yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Wiley.
My name is Lisa Desai. I'm a journalist. I've been working on a documentary about...
You can't hear it, yes.
Is that better? My name's Lisa Desai. I'm working on a documentary about HIV in the rural South. I've been filming this documentary for 2 years now. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay. What I've noticed while filming in South Carolina, I've met a lot of pastors, church leaders who say it's not that they don't want to talk about HIV, it's that they don't know how. They don't know how to even approach the subject. And I'm looking for places where I'm seeing pastors working with other pastors, church leaders working with other leaders. Are there national meetings? Are there, how can I even, is there a place where I can film that process even happening, or is the process not happening?
I would suggest to you the National Black Justice Coalition, who's working with all kinds of congregations and all kinds of pastors doing some of that very work that you're talking about, and they're located in Washington, D.C.
And don't forget the Balm and Gilead that Ms. Massey mentioned. And there are other groups, because NAPWA is doing a lot of this as well. And what Dr. Rana said earlier about physicians having difficulty with this matter is no different than clergy having difficulties with this matter, than lay people having difficulties. And so if we continue to be intentional and courageous, making sure that physicians and clinicians who have the healthcare understandings about this are connecting with those who have spiritual and cultural competency, making sure that we're bringing all these together, we will be able to eradicate this. There's no question about that. But we have to have that courage ourselves. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My role is sort of twofold. I am a health educator with the Department of Health, but I also am an ordained elder and have my own ministry called Unleashing Arrested Development, in which we try to balance both spiritual and natural within individuals who are coming in. To that end, one of the things I know, even as a health professional, one of the things we tried to do back in the mid-90s is to develop a relationship with the churches as an educator to kind of break down some of the denominational lines as it relates to surrounding HIV and AIDS. That being said, things sort of started and sort of fell midway through because there was no follow-through in a lot of instances. I'm hearing so much that came from the panelists on this afternoon. My question is, in as much as we're talking about the stigma about HIV, it really occurred to me that there is stigma across the faith-based community as well, and that we need to really begin to start breaking down the stigma within our denominations and really understand what the focal point really is, because people are people past your denomination, and really begin to deal with where people really are. That being said, my question is next steps. What are these next steps once we leave here today? Are we going to collaborate? Is there going to be something on a larger scale to really begin to impact the District of Columbia the way that we all are wanting to see as a result of the residents that reside in a district that are impacted by HIV and AIDS?
So I would like to try to begin to answer that. I'm part of the Places of Worship Advisory Board for the Department of Health and HOSTA here in the district. That's one resource, one way to plug in. Dr. Wiley is on the Mayor's Interfaith Council here in the district. That's another way to plug in. And I'm sure that there's other representatives here that are working to reduce the prevalence and the incidence of the disease here in the district. One of the things that we have done with the Places of Worship Advisory Board is to sit at the same table. We are representatives across denominations, it's ecumenical, and found common ground where we can talk about the issue of a medical condition that has some social friends. And so, as an advisory board to HOSTA, we advise. But the truth is that many of us are out there doing work. Greater Mount Calvary has a healthcare system and programs to go along with it. The Balm and Gilead is represented at that table. That's an international, as I said, organization. New Samaritan is sitting at that table. And there are others that I just can't even remember. Metropolitan Church is at that table. Damien Ministries is at that table. So the second Friday of every month from 10 to 12 at 899 North Capitol Street in the Department of Health building, HOSTA, 4th floor, is where we meet. If any of you would like to join us, please do come.
Thank you. We are almost out of time, so we have 2 people left, so I'm going to ask you to speak directly to your question and then promptly respond.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin, and I'm in data analysis for Safe Bridge of Help, a non-profit organization that actually invests in Africa. So the question to take this internationally is how and what are the measures that have been taken to actually fight against the faith and that mental stigma that actually is taking and killing the African community, because not only we don't have that education, technology, and infrastructure and everything, but what needs to be done for a better and global community into this stigma.
Anyone want to respond to that? If not, I will. Anybody? Let me just quickly say that many of the agencies that we've heard about here at the table are also working in the international community. Balm and Gilead certainly is, and the Balm is represented here this afternoon. I have been privileged to do some of that work with them, but there are other organizations that are trying to make the connections. You should also know that next summer, this is a PSA, July 19th through the 21st, Howard University will be the host institution with the Balm and Gilead and the Geneva International Committee to host an international interfaith conference on HIV here at Howard. And we're going to be talking about this, and there will be a concerted effort of coming out of that meeting in July to make sure that we especially gather communities and persons of African descent to talk about the issues that are so profoundly impacting us. Because what we are finding is the economics, the politics, and everything else is controlled by folk who are not the predominant people being impacted. And we need to be up front and real about that too. So we will continue to interface, so do not lose hope, because there is much hope for us ahead.
Good afternoon. My question is related to what the person said before me, but more in terms of the African newcomers in the community. When you talk about stigma, I think there was one element that was not addressed is what have you done, or have you come across African immigrant population in your institution, and what have you done about that, or what do you find to be challenging? Because we who work among the African population, we know just to get them to get tested is the biggest challenge. But we do have success once we get them tested. Adherence and compliance is not an issue. So to the organizers, it would be nice to have African pastors and imams among you, so that when we talk about stigma, we need to have a little broader view of that. So I was just wondering if any of them came across anyone from Africa and how they dealt with them. Thank you.
Colleagues, can anyone respond to that? What's happening here in DC in particular?
What's happening here in DC, and I have to apologize because I'm busy trying to get phone numbers and follow up and all that. Ma'am, would you just capsulize your question once again for me? Just short form.
I was just wondering if you have any Africans in your congregation, and what are specific challenges that you're facing and helping them deal with HIV, because it's different reality for the African people.
It is. And to be honest, as far as I am aware, we do not have anyone in our congregation. However, there are resources for folks who are in this area and are immigrants from Africa and other places where they can connect, and we are aware of those. So we can act as a referral conduit for them. We can do that. Stigma is very thick in the African continent. I do know that. Having visited there and fellowship with women from there, it's a different type of situation. But I've found that everywhere I've went, a little education goes a long way. And a lot of support goes a long way. When people realize you're not just gonna drive by with your message, and that's it, and leave them, but that they can call you, you're available and accessible, that means a lot as well. I hope I've addressed your question.
I appreciated your question because some years ago I was director of field studies in another seminary. And one of the things that we were addressing was that Africans were not in African American congregations. They were in white congregations and they were in congregations to themselves. What that points to is how much we need to have this dialogue because we don't worship together. Just wanted to mention that.
We have run out of time. Please, you have, everyone, the evaluation for the workshop. It's a yellow form Tom is holding up back there. Please be sure to fill that out and leave it with us as you depart this afternoon. We have other plenary sessions going on for the remainder of the day. For those of you who are in faith communions, no matter what your tradition, continue to take heart, continue to be courageous, continue to make sure that we are producing life for our communities. For those of you who are in the medical community, health professions, not quite sure about these religious folk, do not stigmatize us. Believe in our capacity to work with you. Let us work together. There's an old South African saying that comes out of the Xhosa tradition. If you have come to help me, then you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Medical community, faith community, irrespective of where our backgrounds have emerged, let us work together to save our people because HIV and AIDS must not have the last word. Thank you, panelists.